All right. Hi, everybody. This is Julia Sotas and
Simone Padur.
hi, Simone Padur. So we're here in Venice, Italy, and we are at a Access Consciousness Symphony of Possibilities training. And Simone and Simone's a teacher, and we were talking about bullying. I've really been thinking about this issue a lot lately, and I just wish that there was better tools and information out there than what is currently out there. And so I asked Simone to do this wonderful hangout with me.
Thanks, Julia.
Yeah. So, tell us a little bit about what you see going on in schools, Simone. Like, I have my own experiences, and I'm 23, so I've only been out of high school for 5 years, and I just would love to hear about what you see.
Well, it's interesting because bullying is not a really straightforward subject. Everybody says, oh, there's bad guys and good guys, but that's not the case at all. What I see often is there may be somebody that if they're different, like kids who are different often get bullied just because they're different and people feel threatened by it. And there is also kids who find the largest kid and they keep poking them and poking them and poking them until the big kid explodes, or whatever kid it is, and so there's this weird dynamic that sets up. It's not really that straightforward, and you really have to look at the kid and what's going on. The other thing I find about bullying is it's really covert.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So, yeah, and also another aspect is like being willing to stand up. Like I know I was bullied in school, and the largest reason I think was because I wasn't willing to stand up because I was worried about not having any friends. So I was like, well, if they're bullying somebody else, then I will just disappear into the background and it'll be okay because at least they're not paying attention to me.
Right.
So that's sort of a little outline of, I guess, where we might go tonight.
Right.
Yeah.
One thing that like you said, it's not a straightforward issue. And one thing that I find really, to me, it's overt. And a lot of people seem stunned by this. And I think it's a lot to do with when I was being bullied as a kid, I would come home weeping about the bullies. And the first thing my mom would say to me is, Julia, think about what's going on at home for the bullies. She's like, my mom is like, she's this amazing woman, and she grew up in a futile household and was a huge bully. She said she used to make people's lives miserable. And I looked up at my mom, this like amazing, great, picture of a perfect mother, and I was like, really? And so it was this different perspective that I took on people. It wasn't this one-dimensional me versus them. I developed a caring for my bully. Perhaps you could say, I don't know.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because something similar happened to me, but not till much, much later. So I had a friend that was going through some tough times, and so there was a group of us that sort of got together and sort of said, hey, what's going on and stuff. And one of them used to be one of my bullies, and she and I'm so grateful to her for this. She was really, really vulnerable on the phone one day, and she said, I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry for the way I treated you, because I looked at you and you knew who you were, you knew where you wanted to go, and you were happy. And she said, I wasn't any of those things, and I wanted it so badly. And I remember listening to Gary Douglas talk about this, and that often it's that thing that the bully sees in the person that they want so badly.
Yeah.
And they don't know how to get it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
What was I going to say? Oh, when I was talking to Simone the other day, you teach your music. I said, how many kids do you have, Simone? Because I wasn't sure if she was a mother or not. We actually just met. We've known of each other for a long time. And she said, I have 70 kids. I was like, oh, you're a teacher.
Yeah, and it's funny because when you hear teachers speak, they always say, oh yeah, my kids, blah, 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 blah. Because they become like your kids. And I teach art, and I teach salsa, and I teach all kinds of things.
Salsa?
Yeah.
Dancing?
Salsa dancing. It's really fun. And that's actually a subject that actually might fit into this. But my youngest kid is probably about 7, and the eldest is 17.
Okay.
So because I'm a specialist, I teach all age groups. So the interesting thing about the salsa lessons is that I was very adamant that unless you had a different sexual preference, that you found a partner that was of the different sex. So like if you were female, you had to find a male or female, whatever, unless you were gay and you wanted to, you know, dance with a girl or a boy.
Where the kids speak, that's a whole other subject of its own, homosexuality in
yes.
school.
Yeah,
but were there some kids who were open enough to say, I'd like to dance with somebody of my same sex?
Oh yeah, there definitely was.
Oh, that's awesome.
Which is amazing because it's taken a long time for this particular school to sort of step into that. So it's really cool that there's more and more of that. Anyway, the cool thing is like often like with the sexes, you don't have like boys and girls coming together, at least at that age, very often, in a sense of communion and a marriage of target. Like you're like, okay, let's dance together. Like what can we do here to have fun and like contribute to each other and, you know, like have a good time? And it created such a sense of peace and just a sense of fun with them, you know. And they're like, oh, like I actually like you as a person, where there is this division I find within like high school that, you know, the boys will like poke the girls to get their attention or pull their hair or whatever, but just being like obnoxious, right? And so here was a venue where they could be like, hey, I really like you and I get to dance with you and show you that I like you in a way that you might actually like, you know. Which was really cool.
Yeah, that doesn't happen very often.
No.
Yeah, no, it's funny. It's just, I think to those times in my life where I was bullied and how it really is the end of the world at that time in your life.
Yeah.
And to have a teacher or a parent who actually sees you is actually rare.
Yeah.
It actually is rare, and you'd hope that it wouldn't be rare. And I was lucky enough because I had parents to go home and cry to, but a lot of kids don't.
So what was your situation? Like, what did it resolve, or like what changed for you? Like, how did it stop?
Well, there was a girl growing up who tormented the hell out of me, and she would just push and push and push and push and push. And one day my sister came into the room, who was 2 years younger than me. And every time she would push me, I'd just let it go. And every time she was in the room, there was like this hypersensitivity and hyper awareness. Like I knew exactly where she was at all times, at all seconds, like who she was with, who she was talking to, where she was in my vicinity. It was like this hypersensitivity because I didn't know where I was going to be attacked from. Yeah. And one day my sister came through the room and she said something along the lines of, "Oh, you little slut," to my sister. And so that was like, I couldn't defend myself, but I could defend my sister. And we had this no swearing policy where if you said one swear word, you would have to leave school for the day. So I just like gave it to her and screamed and yelled. And it was amazing. It was like that sense of shaking where you're like, did I really just do that? And she was like, "Teacher," like she just swore. The teacher pretended not to listen. But it was funny how with situations like that, we're willing to defend others, but we're not willing to have our own back. And I think that's the key. One of the keys of what this conversation really is about is the willingness to have kids' backs and to teach kids to have their own backs. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because, I mean, the kids that I've worked with over the years, like, it's something that I've always looked at because it's always been an interesting subject for me. Like, what the hell is going on? Like, what is creating this dynamic? And I find that as a teacher, not as a like, oh, I'm going to protect you, because the moment you try to protect the person, they don't learn how to fend for themselves. They don't learn how to have their own back.
Right. And often it gets a lot worse because they're a double target and a tattletale.
Yeah. But I find that, like, if I stand up to the individual, because often teachers get it too. So if you have a kid that's bullying other kids, they'll often target a teacher as well. Like, I've seen numerous teachers bullied.
Actually, that's true.
I mean, I remember teachers.
Oh, pardon me. Excuse me.
I've seen teachers that have left like a school that I was at because, I mean, I admit I was part of it. There was this math teacher who just, bless you.
Pardon me.
He wasn't willing to recognize that there was a problem with a lot of us not getting the information. And so we got bored, which is dangerous. And
bullying comes from boredom.
It can do, yeah, it can do. Because kids get bored and they just start, well, what can I do? Oh, I'll just pester this person. So as a teacher, being willing to stand up and say, your behavior is not appropriate and it's got to stop. The rest of the kids, they're always watching you, no matter what age they are or how disinterested they appear to be, they're watching you. And I remember a situation where I did this in my classroom, and it gave the other people and students in the room a sense of power and a sense of, actually, I could step into that. I could do that. And that's where I would encourage anybody, whether it's in your workplace or whatever, what if you had the courage to step into that?
Yeah, and it is like mind-numbingly terrifying, but at the same time, it will be like the greatest return. It's funny. Last night we went out dancing, and nobody was dancing on the dance floor, and so a friend and I went out dancing, and within like 2 minutes, the whole dance floor was packed with people. People were coming out of their shells and coming to life, and people were like taking pictures from around, and they were like, what is this bop in place? And it's like the willingness to actually be the first one to get on the dance floor to say, no, this isn't working. You can't. This behavior doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's people need, like, in those situations, if you can be the leader, to say, this has to be different. You can't do this anymore.
Making that demand. Like, I know the reason the bullying stopped in my school now, when I look back at when I was being bullied, is that I made the demand in my universe, like, this isn't working for me. This has to stop. And the teachers started noticing it was happening. And they had a meeting with the class about it. And it was then that one of the other girls that was feared by the rest of my class, she hung out with the older girls and she was quite tough. When she started seeing it happening, she would say, what are you guys doing? This is not okay. And she was willing to have my back. And then I was like, oh, so this is possible.
Right.
So, yeah. And also asking a question, like if you're a kid or whomever you are, like, okay, so what would it take for this to change? You know, and just constantly asking. Because my dad, when I was a kid, we were playing tennis, and I was terrible at tennis. The ball would fly past me and I wouldn't know what was going on. And he said to me, when the ball is coming towards you, in your head, say hit. And what it does is it sort of gives you this ability to, it's not really focus, but just be really aware. And that's what I find the question does. Like, if you ask a question, it allows you to be really aware of whatever's going on, which, as far as bullying, is invaluable as far as I'm concerned. It
is. Well, actually, I could see how that can take, like, that hyper, like, as I was saying before, when that specific girl was in the room and I was, like, on edge at every single second. I couldn't, like, it's exhausting.
It is.
And to be that age and have your body changing and not know who you are and have all those things, and then have to be on, like, hyper sensitivity at all seconds. And I think that asking questions really could change that into, like, okay, so this is not good. And, like, how do I change it? And even, like, you don't have to get answers. Just keep asking the question.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is when you ask those questions, and I've used this numerous times with all ages, is that it's really simple. Any age can do it, and it gives you information, and it might not give you information right away, and it might show up in a completely bizarre way. Like, somebody says something, like, oh, I have to go and talk to that person, or, oh, I have to watch that TV show, or whatever.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. Actually, I read a book recently. I know that Access Consciousness, the work that we do, talks about the question a lot. And I also read a book recently called The Power of Why.
Okay.
And it was about how the most successful business people are the ones who always ask the most questions. Like, they don't come to conclusions in their mind, like, oh, this is the worst thing ever. Or they actually go, okay, so, like, what's it going to take to change this? Or like, who do I have to talk to? Where do I have to go? Like, what angle do I have to take here?
Well, and I know even, I don't know the quote off by heart, but even Einstein would talk about like willing to ask questions all the time allowed him to get where he was, because he never came to a conclusion. He never went, oh, I've solved the world's problems, or I know all of the laws to physics, you know, so that's huge. And transfers to all kinds of different things, not just bullying.
Yeah, it does. Actually, that's funny you said that, because I heard the other day that Leonardo da Vinci had a procrastination problem. He hated himself because he was always procrastinating. And I was like, fuck, we're really too hard on ourselves. Because that's what Da Vinci was doing.
I know.
He still got the Mona Lisa done. He can't have been doing too
bad. No. Yeah, and I mean, he built, like, he designed, like, all kinds of different machines, and, like, I mean, the man was this magnitude of creativity, and yeah. And that's something else about bullying, is it's because often the bullies don't know how to access that information that person has, they will try and crush it.
Say more about that.
So let's say you have a talent or something with music or whatever, and
oh, totally.
Yeah, they will try and crush that out of you, like you're not good enough or you're not whatever, because they're trying to find a way to find out what it is that you do. And it sounds really weird, and yet I've seen it in my own life. Like the girl that bullied me, like she was desperate to find out how I made art, how I sang with such joy, how I just was me, you know, and she was really stuck in her own world. I mean, she came from a very affluent family, but it wasn't a happy one.
Right.
So she was desperately trying to find, well, what is it that you do?
Right. It's so, I mean, that there's some saying that I can't think of right now. But just like that place where people, if you don't understand something, you have to find a way to dismiss it or squash it.
Or dismantle it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So what if we talk a little bit about the people who deliberately go after the biggest kid or the bully or whatever, and like try and get the attention, but not a fun attention. It's like, how can I get myself beat up today? You know, like, what is that? Like, have you seen that? Or
not a lot, but I get what's going on. Like it's a place where it's a game. Like it's something.
It's like chicken.
Yes. It's something to conquer. What can I do today? And I mean, that stems from boredom.
Yeah.
That stems from not being creative enough. And schools are not creative enough for the most part. Maybe if Miss Padur is your art teacher, it's a good deal. But
yeah.
And I mean, training or education should be more about awareness than training.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so very much about training and getting it right rather than taking, and I mean, school would have to be structured completely differently in order for this to work, but we would have to like have a method of taking each individual child and looking at their unique abilities and helping those flourish. And it wouldn't be as cheap as it is, you know. You'd have to have a lot more attention for each kid and a lot more staff and or maybe just a teacher who's really, really able to juggle all that. But I never saw that happening. I mean, I went to a good school. I don't want to say it was a bad thing, but there's just like, if you're gonna, a lot of people had the potential to have them and what is uniquely them flourish, and a lot of that just got squashed just because of it was just not, school wasn't set up like that.
Yeah,
it was set up to fit the kid into the mold and train them rather than take the kid and ask them what they know and what their awareness is.
So I've been working on a project lately, and so I've been having lots of discussions with different people, and it's going to be called the Access Possibility School, and it's changing and morphing, and what it will become. Stay tuned, you'll find out. And one of the big things that has been my experience and those of like parents and things like that is that, yeah, it would be awesome to have a school like that. And what can we do in the meantime? What tools can we provide?
Yeah, it's a bit of a utopian, and it is possible.
It is possible, yeah.
Until then.
So what I found the biggest contribution to my kids was choice. So even the simple thing of like, if they had a lesson, like providing different avenues that they could access that lesson, whether it be drawing or whether it be writing or whatever. And also like I'd have different stations, particularly for the younger ones, so they could access what was really interested, which was maybe drawing or maybe building or whatever that was.
Can I just stop you for a second? I like that approach because it's actually really hands-on. And I know that, we're unplugged here. I know that a lot of the curriculums, and then also like the special, what is it called? The conferences that teachers go to, like the PE. The professional development.
Days.
Yeah. And a lot of it is based on like morals. Like, what morals are we going to teach these kids? And so you want to teach them friendliness, and you want to teach them kindness, and you want to teach them to be cooperative. And there's like these banners of these concepts.
Yeah.
And they're enforcing the concepts, but they're not enforcing the pragmatic, actual, like, getting involved that would create the concepts. They're just putting these ideals and slamming them down on kids' head and saying, hey, you're not measuring up to that ideal, rather than what you're describing, which is more of a, like, give the kids a choice, like you said, and I'm excited to hear more about that, but give the kids a choice and allow them to, like, create these cooperation and kindness and friendliness or whatever they are themselves, rather than like taking these concepts and smashing them down on the kids' heads.
Well, I think it starts in teachers, in teachers college. I mean, I was really fortunate to go to a university where I had a professor, and instead of saying, oh, I'm going to teach you this and you are going to have this tool and this tool, which never worked. The only time I learned what I needed to about my craft, if you will, is when I was in the classroom and I was on my feet and going, okay, these theories don't work and I don't know what to do. And so I started reading voraciously any books that I could get my hands on that would give me tools. And when I started doing this thing called Access Consciousness, I actually had pragmatic tools that I could use all the time. And it's not even that I used them out loud or even said them to the children quite often. It was that I would ask myself questions in my head and say, okay, so what would it take to change this, or what can I do differently? And that's when things started to change. Getting back to the choice thing, not only would I give kids choice when they were doing projects, but if I had, like, I was working in a traditional school in the Middle East. So yeah, that's a happy, fun place often. And I loved my kids. They were amazing. They were fiery, feisty, and a real handful. And they would come up to me and they're like, Miss, he hit me. And then blah, 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 blah. And I would stop them and I'd go, wait a minute. Did you actually tell the other person that you didn't like it? No. And I'm like, well, that would help. You know, like, tell them that you don't like them when they hit, like, stop hitting me. You know, it's simple. But they were so used to running to an adult to tell them to stop, like, to control their lives, basically, right?
Right. Oh, gosh. Authority is a whole nother conversation.
It is, yeah. And yet when I would talk to them and I would have both parties come up and say, what's your point of view? Okay, what's your point of view? Okay, what are we going to do about it? And they would, like, when they first started, they were a bit cruel with, like, oh, they should go in the corner and beat their head against the wall. And I was like, no, we're not going to do that. So what could we do? And they're like, oh, well, if he says sorry, I'm okay with it.
Right.
And all of a sudden, because I had given the choice to them to resolve their problems, not only did they become a better, you know, resolver of their own issues.
Wow.
But there was less of this bickering and fighting because they weren't trying to get my attention to solve their problems. They were actually sorting them out themselves.
Wow. That's the definition of empowerment.
Yeah.
Like that's actually not helping, it's empowering.
Yeah. Yeah, because you take yourself out of the equation. You're there as a facilitator, but you're really not a teacher.
Right. It's the teach a kid to fish or give a kid a fish.
Yeah,
You're teaching kids to fish.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Can you say a little bit more about choice? Like maybe give some more, like another example of that. That's a great example, but maybe in like a choice between projects and assignments, or like how does that work and what does it do in a kid's head?
Well, I'll give you an example. I did this art project, and this is something to be aware of if you're a teacher, even a parent, and your kids are just getting used to choice. If you say to them, okay, you can do anything, you could choose anything, blah, 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 the kid kind of goes, right?
Yeah. Choice has a tendency for in all ages across the board to make people freeze and go still and not choose anything.
Yeah. So you basically are educating your kids how to make choices, right? So what I would do is the lesson might be really form and structure, like I was teaching Northwest Coast Art, which has a lot of shapes and things that you have to, quote unquote, like use to build the piece.
Right.
And so they had to use that language of those shapes.
Okay.
However, they could do painting, they could do sculpture, they could do jewelry, as long as they used those shapes. So they had basically 3 choices that they could then choose. And you could make it as easy or as difficult as you wanted. And I wasn't going to mark them down for choosing an easy project.
Right.
Because that's a lot of what happens in schools is that, well, in life actually, is like the hard choice is the good choice.
Right.
What if it's not?
Yes, we are very much taught that hard work is what will pay off.
Yeah.
And it is. And a lot of times we make our life a lot harder than it has to be.
Well, I often wonder if it's that we've confused it, that it's not that hard work, that we have to make it hard to make it valuable, but what if it's the practice that's valuable? Like you sing and act and do such things, yes?
I do such things.
Yes.
Play the piano, yeah.
So you practice, right?
Yes.
Right. So, but doesn't have to be hard work. Might not always be easy.
I mean, sometimes getting through those things is like putting your head through a brick. But at the same time, I was very much taught to make things harder than they had to be.
Right.
Just on the basis of things that are harder are more valuable in this world. And we do I made things a lot more difficult for myself than they had to be. So, but yeah, we've kind of gone off the topic of bullying, but we didn't.
We're good at that.
No, but we really didn't in a way, because this is actually going past the root, like to the root of bullying, in the places where kids are getting bored, or like education is about training. So they are like, kids themselves are incredibly creative beings.
Yes.
Like they are amazing little humans, and when they're not able to be creative or to express themselves and who they actually are, they have no choice but to act out. It's like putting an atomic bomb and not, well, that's not a very good example, but it's like there's this explosion that can take place, and it can be this amazing thing, and it just gets squashed and made wrong. Yeah, they're ticking.
Yeah, it's very much that way. And as soon as I have a kid, and it's the same with animals too, like if you have a really smart animal, and you don't give them enough to do, they will find something to do. And it might not be the most, creative or contributive, way. And it is also contributive because they're telling you, hey, there's something that's not working for me here.
Right.
And I have a great example of this. I decided to do paper mache, a large project of paper mache with like pop bottles and stuff with grade 1s.
Wow.
So I know, I was insane. So these are 6-year-olds with gluey paper mache, and this is 30 in a class, between 27 and 30 kids.
And they're like 6 years old.
Yes, with gluey paper mache hands. And they were horrible for 2 weeks. And I was like, what is going on? Because these kids are usually so much fun. Yeah, they're a little wild, but something's going wrong. And so I didn't ask any questions for 2 weeks, and I was just getting grumpier and grumpier, and they were getting grumpier and grumpier, and it was really not going well. And then I finally asked a question. I was like, okay, so what can I do differently here, or what can I change? And then I was like, oh my God, like, what if I asked them a question? So I went into class and I was like, hey, you guys, how many, raise your hands, actually like paper mache? 4 kids. Now I was teaching like 7 grade 1 classes, and I would say out of those 7 grade 1 classes of 30 kids each, in each class there was maybe 4, maybe 5 kids actually liked paper mache. The rest hated it.
Right.
So I brought the garbage bin up to the front of the class. I said, you're not going to lose marks for this. Anybody that really hates this project, throw your piece in the bin. And they all like trooped up there with big grins on their faces. And I remember one class distinctly, you know, they had to line up because their teacher would collect them afterwards. And I looked at them and I said, you know, you guys, I'm so sorry. I've been so grumpy with you for 2 weeks, and I really apologize. You know, and this little boy looked at me and he's like, you should be. So they let you know, like, and if you're willing to have a conversation with them, you can find out whether you're a parent or a teacher or whether you work with kids in another capacity. They'll tell you what's going on for them if you just give them, you know, the opportunity.
Well, and it's really valuable to people, like, that you have to do things that you don't like in order to get used to not liking things. You know, the world's a cruel place.
It's insane, isn't it?
And it's like, is that really going to make people's lives better if they're unexcited? Like, it's not acknowledging who the person is. Like, if you try to make somebody good at something that doesn't excite them, they have no choice but to rebel. It's an unkindness to somebody's spirit.
I know. I used to see so many kids, and this was in a regular system, and I tried to give them as much as I could within the short time because I only saw them each probably 40 minutes a week, and I had over 600 children. And yeah, that in itself, that has got to change in the system. Like, classes that large, you can't possibly as a teacher be, you know, able to feed and, you know, nourish each one of those kids. It's really, really hard.
Yeah.
And we're getting more and more kids who are different, that require more attention or require a different kind of attention. And it's making life really difficult and stressful for everybody.
For everybody.
Involved. Yeah, parents included. Like, yeah. So where was I going with this? Yeah, there was this little boy, and he was just the sweetest, kindest, loveliest guy. And he was an inventor. Like, he was like, oh, and if I stick a bit of paper here, and then a paper clip, and then the stapler, and the blah, 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 plane. You know, like, so cute. But he would make himself sick so he could go to the nurse. And this is in kindergarten. Mm-hmm. Like, he was already learning to make himself ill to not have to go to class because he preferred being with the nurse because he didn't have to do all these things that he was forced to do when he just wanted to be out there putting things together to create something.
Right. Yeah. I can see how that creates a bit of mayhem and bullying in schools.
Well, not only that, I mean, when you look at the larger picture, we have the schools are bullying the teachers and the kids, and it's not.
Yeah, the system.
Yeah, it's the system. It's not really anybody's fault, but it's just the way the system is, and it hasn't changed since the Industrial Revolution, because that's what schools were set up for, was to train the workers. Yeah. So maybe we could change this, people. What else is possible?
Yeah. What other systems? Like, and it's not about changing. I don't think it's really about changing the existing system. I think it's about replacing the system that exists with something completely different, because there's no way to change that I can see to change that embedded of a structure. But if you bring in a new system, it is possible.
I think even if it was to change just a smidgen, just having more teachers and less kids would be a huge contribution. Like, I went to a school where the largest class was like 20, maybe. The smallest class was like 10. And there was such a nurturing, and just, it was so good. And also having teachers that have tools. Like I had a friend, and again, this is when I was working in traditional schools, and there was this class and they were really horrible. They like locked their teacher out, and they like threw things at each other all the time, and they were like the worst class ever. And so that teacher was put somewhere else because she wasn't coping very well. And this other girl was brought in, and sure, she was strict, and she cared so much about these kids, and she started teaching them all these cool things. And the next thing, this whole class was like by themselves going out and like picking up litter, and really they were totally empowered by this one teacher to be them and discover and learn. And and she was quote unquote a traditional teacher. She had expectations of, you have to meet this. But one of the things that was very clear was she cared about the kids. She never looked at them like, oh, you're a troublemaker. She just cared about all of them, and she was interested in finding what worked for all of them.
Right. And I mean,
yeah,
kids and people just want to be seen.
Yeah.
They just want to be seen.
It's really simple.
That's all it takes.
Yeah.
But I mean, and it goes right back to the beginning of our conversation. We're just about to end here. But like what my mom taught me as a kid, like, what is going on with the bully? Where are they at home?
Mm-hmm.
Like, is their dad drinking, or have they been sexually abused? Like, what's going on? And I actually, like, as a kid, dove into those questions. And most parents try to protect. And by like diving in and looking at what was actually going on, I could like have empathy and not like just take it blindly, but to know where the person is coming from. And that's one step in being able to see
Definitely.
people.
And it's also willing to recognize that people choose. Like, my brother was abused by my dad. And he is one of the kindest, sweetest men I know.
Yeah.
So it's also a choice, and being willing to realize that, they may be having a tough time, but I also know bullies that weren't having a tough time. So it's also being willing to recognize that this person is making a choice to be unkind, to be a bully, and to not let yourself be at the effect of it. Because I know when I was a kid, like, it's like, oh, this had such a hard life, and that's why they're mean, and I should, really have compassion for it. But then in a way that then cut myself off from actually being willing to see them for the jerks that they were.
Yes.
So it's definitely, I agree with you, and like being willing to look at the whole picture too.
Yeah, I think it's a like an interesting walk that a tightrope walk that you just have to be really aware on.
Definitely.
And not just try to come to some sort of conclusion about what it is, but actually look at what is going on.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, that pretty much concludes our talk. Is there anything else that you wanted to add?
What if we had like maybe 2 or 3 tips? Like, what would you be your top 2 or 3 tips for kids or parents or teachers or?
Well, for me personally, what has worked is really, the first one would be looking into somebody's world and seeing where they're coming from.
Right.
And not necessarily like buying it and feeling bad about it and taking it like the abuse, but really looking into somebody's life and going, what's going on with them?
Where
Why
they're
are they
functioning
doing
from.
this?
Yeah. Mine would be like the willingness to have courage and realize that it isn't really, the judgments and stuff that might be thrown at you aren't real. Like, that was huge for me. Like, realizing that somebody calling me names or whatever, that was just their opinion. That didn't make it true. Right.
Say a little bit more about that. I get what you're saying, but I think people could use a little bit more detail.
So, like, if somebody says, oh, your nose is pointy, or you have an ugly nose or whatever, not only that, but they might be accusing you of how they feel about themselves. So, like, this one person was always calling me snobby, and I was like, I don't understand. Or selfish. And I'm like, I don't understand. And then I looked at them and I was like, wow, that's what they think of themselves, or that's how they are acting. So being willing to know that people often accuse them accuse you, sorry, of what they themselves are feeling about themselves or how they're acting. So that's something to be aware. That's actually probably second tool.
That's okay. Keep going.
But also, like, when somebody throws a judgment at you or, you know, says something to you, it's just their opinion. Like, it's doesn't mean it's true. It's like people see different colors. Like, oh, I think that's blue. No, I think that's turquoise. You know, like, it's just the way you look at things.
Right. Well, that's a great tip. I love it. Well, this has been an awesome hangout. I'm really
so
glad that we
much.
had this conversation.
Yeah.
And I'd love for us to have another one on kids with special needs.
That would be great.
Yeah,
Mhm.
autism and OCD and ADHD.
Mhm.
I think that's
That
a
would be
big
really good.
topic and really important in schools. So we'll have
Definitely.
to continue this
Yeah,
conversation.
that would be great.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone who joined us tonight. And
thanks to our live audience.
Yes, we do have a live audience. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone, and we hope to catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.